the biggest challenge is to actually understand what is it that you want. You might want something, but you don't know it yet, or you don't know how to get there. That's the biggest thing.
Welcome to Keep Taking Ground, the saxophone podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ryan, and today's guest is an award-winning Cuban-born saxophonist that has both Juno Awards and Grammy nominations to his name. He's the winner of the Grand Prix de Jazz General Motors 2006 at the Montreal Jazz Festival, performing with David Varela's Quintet, and he was also named the Galaxy Rising Star 2010 at the Halifax Jazz Festival, performing with Rich Brown and Rinse the Algorithm. He's performed and recorded with names like Mark Turner, Tony Allen, Hilario Duran, Paquito de Rivera, Horacio El Negro Hernandez, Daphne Spirito, Canada's Global Orchestra Cune, Barry Harris, and Randy Brecker, amongst others. He's also someone that I had the pleasure of studying with in the last year of my undergraduate program. Mr. Luis Deniz, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much, Jesse. I'm very honored to be your guest on this podcast.
And yeah, I'm excited too, because even though I have the pleasure of studying with you, I feel like if there's so much more that we could dive into today, especially for the audience, to just kind of learn about you and just talk about your journey. You know, the purpose of this podcast is to help both the professional and aspiring professional saxophonists to be inspired and be empowered to keep taking ground in their personal and professional journey. So let's begin by talking about your journey. How did you begin playing the saxophone?
Absolutely. I do not come from a family of musicians. There are no musicians. I mean, by profession, in the places like the kind of countries that we come from, music is very much a part of everybody's life.
Yeah.
You know, all over the Caribbean, a lot of places in South America. So, you know, everyone in my family was a music lover, but no one was a musician by trade.
Okay.
And when I was a kid, I've done, things like being in playwrights and like do poetry and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my mom noticed that I had some sort of an inclination for the arts.
Right.
So, so I went and auditioned for the Vocational School of Arts in the town that I was born in Camagüey. And I got in and they said, well, what instrument would you want to play? And I actually said, well, my mom likes the saxophone, so I guess I'll go with that. And that was my beginning with the saxophone. And, in Cuba, I believe up until today, it's all what people call classical saxophone school, which refers to, 20th century music composed by the French. Like they were the ones who really developed that school.
Yeah.
I think really today in the world, there's only two major saxophone schools established. There's a French school and the American one. Everything else is just, some sort of a branch from those two schools.
Right.
So I did that for 9 years, and it was very rigorous, but also very rewarding because it's you're expected to play the instrument at a very high level.
Yeah.
And it taught me a lot of what I still do today. It was very important for me to be a part of that type of education, if you will. And around the time I was, maybe 13, I got the jazz bug. And of course, there's no real jazz school in Cuba, which I now see as a good thing. So then I did what everybody else has done in Cuba, which is you find recordings and you transcribe and you learn repertoire and you play with friends. By the time I was doing this, I was very lucky to have two people that were about 10 years older than me, two guys that are, you know, some of the most well-established Cuban saxophonists in the world right now. One of them is Roman Filiu, which is a New York, Madrid alto saxophonist, who's very well known, I think, at this point. And the other one is Irving Acao, who's based in Paris.
Yep.
These guys were, you know, the generation that was playing with Chucho Valdez and Irakere when I was, you know, around 15 and up.
That's amazing.
And they were coming back with a lot of music. So, you know, it was a very important time to be in Cuba because they were coming back and they were introducing us. And of course, they lived in very small apartments, so they needed to come to school to hang out and stuff. At that point, you know, Irving is from Camagüey, and Roman had done his school in Camagüey. It's also kind of funny because Camagüey in Cuba is sort of recognized as the saxophone school.
Really?
It's there is a vibe there, and there were certain teachers that created that school. One of them is in Mexico, and he's actually created the saxophone school in Mexico, Roberto Benitez. Okay. And so a lot of people from all over Cuba actually started in Camagüey, you know, and that was Roman, for example, and of course, Irving was from Camagüey. So they would come back, you know. Then later on, I moved to Havana to attend the National School of Arts. Yeah. And then that's really when I spent the most time with them, you know, because every time they were in touring, they were at school. And we spent all day long playing, you know. And these were the people that introduced me to a lot of the music that we all listen to, you know. Through them, we have people like Steve Coleman, for example, who was someone that was, I would say, an extremely important person in the people of my generation. Okay. Because when we were 17, we were all really into, you know, like Kenny Garrett and Branford Marsalis and all these people. And he was the first one who came and said, well, that's all well and good, but you guys need to check out Bert. You need to check out Charlie Parker, and you need to know about Bud Powell, and you need to know about Dizzy Gillespie. Yeah. You know, you need to understand this music so that you can understand all these people that you like. You know, and there is something about at that age having someone that you admire that much say that to you, and it really actually changed everything for me. At that point, I just went into this crazy Charlie Parker thing that I haven't been able to leave. You know, I'm still in it. But you know, it was crucial for me to try to understand the language and to try to play it without sounding exactly like Charlie Parker. So, and as I started checking out more of bebop, the one thing I noticed that I don't think has happened in any other part of jazz is like, you know, Charlie Parker led me to Dizzy, and then that led me to Jazz and Massey Hall, and then I discovered, you know, Bud Powell, but then that led me to Monk, and of course through Bird, that led me to Sonny Rollins. And the one thing I noticed about the bebop players is that bebop, it's a language. Right. They all speak the same language with different variations, but they're all talking about the same thing. Yeah. You know? So it became crucial for me to try to understand the language and to actually come up with my own, you know, my own topic of conversation. Right. Not to just take the Yoni book and learn everything that Charlie Parker did and just try to sound verbatim like him. You know, I wanted to sound like someone who understands and can play bebop. You know, so that's been the to be honest, that has been the source of everything I've done up until now.
That's so interesting, and it's something that I've heard you mention before, and I'm happy we're getting the chance to go a little bit deeper today. So, what have you been in pursuit of since then? What has created? Let's kind of define what your ground is. What have you in pursuit of, and what are some of the things you value as a saxophone player?
Well, as a saxophone player, I mean, I've been trying to reconcile like where I come from and the experiences that I've had uh, to where I want to take music, and it's interesting because as you get older, you think
Yeah.
about all these things, and coming from a place like Cuba that has a deep, rich cultural background
Yeah.
in all aspects, because it's not only music. There's just so much culture, combined with like a European type of studying, in the way of like the stuff that we have to do with saxophone, and it was very, very rigorous. Uh, Trying to reconcile all of these things,
Yeah.
and I guess all of that, trying to make my playing uh, more human. At the
Mm.
end of the day, that's really, really what matters. I mean, music, jazz, any kind of form, it's all about the human condition. So I'm trying uh, to bring in as much humanity as possible. This is why, uh, you know, I talk about a lot of like the technical stuff and all that because it's
Hmm.
important so that your brain it's not thinking about it when you're trying to create music.
Right.
But at the end of the day, uh, I when I practice, I separate things because to me, playing, and I heard Brad from Masala talking about this, and I could
Yeah.
not be in more agreement with him. There's a difference between playing an instrument and playing music.
Right. It's two
Those are
separate spheres that,
two very separate things.
but they
You know,
overlap.
so they overlap. But
Right.
when I go
Yeah.
to play, I don't care what happens. It
Mm.
can be as raw as anything. I'm not looking for perfect. I don't care
Mm.
about perfect. I'm looking for humanity.
Mm.
I want people to hear what I'm playing and say, "Wow, this guy was really sad," or
Wow.
"Wow, this guy was really happy." And hopefully, with
Yeah.
whatever kind of music I play in
Yeah.
whatever band,
Yeah.
transfer that to the person who's listening to the music.
I feel
You
like
know?
if that's also a big part of what identifying Bird's playing. When he
Yeah.
was there's, I think the overarching emotion I feel when I listen to Bird is joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and but also there are some recordings when he's playing a ballad or something where you can also feel the sadness in it depending on
Right.
the music. He was so intentional about being emotive with his playing. So it's interesting that that's something that you've come to value or something that you continue working towards, but it's also coming from one of your biggest influences too, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I really don't want to control anything.
Wow.
I want to play music as vulnerable as I possibly can, because only then, in my opinion, that's really when the magic happens.
I mean,
You
that's
know?
that's that's such a potent idea, and I think it's also a very liberating one for, I mean, anybody really, but the aspiring saxophonist to kind of grasp that idea. But why I think it's also so potent is because you're also pairing that or balancing it with the idea of the two spheres that you have to learn how to play your instrument first,
Right.
and get that out of the way. And I'd like to come back to that in a bit, but I
Yep.
want to go a little bit deeper with the idea of being vulnerable and making sure that the music that you play is expressing your own humanity or addressing the human condition. That versus the word you used, Jason, was playing in a controlled way or playing controlled. So it's controlled versus vulnerable. Can you talk about
Right.
that? What that means for you a little bit more, and how you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, music and especially jazz, it's very social. So when you're playing with another 4, 5, 6, whatever amount of people in a band, I mean, I want to sound like myself, but I don't want to come with any preconceived ideas of what I'm going to do. To me, that's not what this music is about.
Right.
There's just something beautiful about just being that vulnerable and let things happen. And also, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I've been going back to the Miles Davis Quintet, like the band from the 60s with Herbie and Sonny and Ron and Wayne. And to me, that's how I want to play music. Not exactly how they play it, but that idea, which is what Wayne showed a quartet is. It's just complete camaraderie. There's no one guy just, flashing on the front of the stage and 3 other guys following him. No, it's 4 brothers making music. To me, this is an attitude,
Right.
And it's an attitude that speaks to me because it's inclusive and brings out the idea of community, not listen to me what I have to say.
Yeah.
I don't want to play music like that. I want to play music the other way.
Now, what do you say to someone who may not be at that level? How do you begin that journey of working towards that ideal?
Well, I think it's key to listen to those people.
Okay.
Anything in the world of music, I think anything you want to achieve, this is something that people tend to get confused about, and they think that there are certain holy grails to be found, and it's all very simple.
Okay.
The whole thing is very simple. Like you want to have a good tone in saxophone, you want to develop your own tone. You got to go and listen to people that have great tone.
Okay.
And for that tone to be truly unique, you have to listen to more than one guy. I would recommend that, because then the sum of different concepts are going to make you come up with your own concept.
Right.
But it's the same thing. I think really the biggest challenge is to actually understand what is it that you want. You might want something, but you don't know it yet, or you don't know how to get there. That's the biggest thing. Once the idea becomes clear in front of your eyes, you can actually find the path to get there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you are, where in the world you are, how long have you been playing. I'm thinking about things, and like my eyes are being open every single day about things that I want to do with music, what music means to me, what I don't want it to mean to me. Like there are so many things. So I think the most important thing is to know in which direction you're headed. And in my experience, the ideal way of finding your direction is to talk to a lot of people.
Okay.
To try to, people say don't never meet your heroes. I don't agree with that, because even the bad experiences teach you something.
Absolutely.
But,
Absolutely.
In my case, I never went to jazz school, and not coming from a North American kind of way of living, and trying to play jazz, I always felt like I was missing something, But when I got out of Cuba and I moved to Canada, I think within like 3 months of living in Toronto, Branford Marsalis Quartet came to play at what the Jazz Bistro is today, which used to be
the Senator. Yeah.
Right. So and I was like I was like a kid in a candy store, because I grew up with that band.
Right.
For whatever reason, when I was coming up, that band was something that all my friends, everybody was listening to. And in fact, I think the very first jazz record I had was Branford Marsalis Trio, The Dark Keys, which I had to put away because I was nowhere near prepared for that.
Right.
It's basically, uh, like a Sonny Rollins trio situation with like trains band together, you know? And then of course you got like, you know, there's a couple of tracks where Joe Aldana plays and Kenny Garrett plays, you know, so then you got this voices joining in this already established sound. And, you know, so I you know, that record, for example, I had to put it away and come back later. But when I got to see that band, that was just, and this is another thing that it's become very important to me. You know, I understand because of work situations and also because in jazz it is important to play with as many people as possible.
Right.
But often I look at like bands in New York and things like that, and I see a lot of like all-star groups. You know, greatest drummer with the greatest saxophone player, with the greatest piano player, the greatest bass player. You know, I really dig the concept of a band, and that takes me back to the Miles Davis Quintet, Joe Culture Quartet, you know, Branford Marsalis Quartet, you know, the new Wayne Shorter Quartet, which is not new; it's 20 years old now, you know. But like there's something about the music that a band can make that four all-star guys cannot. They just don't get there.
Wow.
And this is just my opinion, you know. And this is really what's important for me. I mean, individually, maybe on the all-star band, you might like these players individually more than the guys that I'm mentioning. But what these people can achieve as a group, that's really what I want to do.
Okay.
You know, and it's difficult because it requires a lot of external help. If you want to have a working band, you gotta, and especially in Canada, it's even more difficult, you know, to try to constantly play and constantly tour to keep developing that sound, right? But to me, this is really what's important.
Wow. Yeah.
You know,
I'd like us to chat about the idea of playing the saxophone and playing music as being two separate spheres, because I'm getting the sense that, you know, if you can't master or at least play the instrument well, attaining all these extra goals in the music is not going to be even possible at all in any way.
And this is something that, you know, coming from Cuba, after I moved to Canada and, you know, started teaching at places like Humber College, I saw that right away. And I was, you know, I mean, they have a curriculum they need to push. And I understand that, but, you know, it was very difficult for me because I was being asked, or not necessarily because, I mean, no one was telling me what to do, but, you know, I'm seeing what the priorities as an institution are, and I'm going like, having this guy try to play 26-2 is like asking the same guy right now to get into a UFC ring with a world champion. He's gonna die. You know, this guy is just not prepared. So, and especially like, for example, the biggest thing about this specific topic is that in Cuba, you could be from any part of Cuba because the system is unified.
Okay.
It doesn't matter where you went to school in Cuba. If later you're gonna audition for the National School of Arts, you've done exactly the same thing as a guy from Havana, and you live 500K from that guy. You went to exactly the same school. You played from the same book. You did everything. So you know, right then and there, it is expected that you are at the same level.
Right. So there's sort of a foundation that everybody kind of goes through, so that now the focus is taking those fundamental skills and doing whatever you want to do with it at the next level.
You don't do that. You don't go through that. You can audition.
Right.
You would have to go through those channels in order to be able to get into the national school. But for example, in Canada, you get people who come from a family of musicians. So maybe this person was already playing an instrument. maybe they started with piano, and then
Right.
maybe the dad is a saxophone player or something, and then they come to school and they got a lot of things working already, as opposed to someone who discovered that they like music and maybe they play the saxophone in like school at a band,
Right.
but there's nothing behind that to suggest any more knowledge other than that.
Right.
And now these two people are meeting in the same year at the same school.
Yeah.
And they're being asked to achieve the same thing musically.
Right. Right.
So I find like specifically in North America, it is imperative that changes. I think I mean, before I bring up any kind of conversation to any student, I need to know where they are technically, because the conversation will change drastically,
right,
depending what this person is.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you my own anecdote. The first time I decided to transcribe Charlie Parker, I went for confirmation. And I was 17 years old.
Okay.
I started playing the saxophone when I was 10. So I had a good 6-7 years of intense saxophone studying.
Yeah.
Just the mechanics of the instrument, the sound, technique, all that. I put that thing on, and I mean, I'm blessed with perfect pitch, which I found out later. So I could hear everything. I couldn't play anything, and I was just there and going like, I don't understand, So it took hours. I think maybe 3 or 4 hours before I started being able to play some of the things, and like slowly try to get these things, So from my perspective, I didn't have any holes with when it comes to technique and like understanding how to play the saxophone. And I was struggling that much trying to play something that Charlie Parker played, So I feel for anyone who doesn't have enough understanding of the instrument,
right,
and then tries to tackle this thing. Now, we need to talk about the fact that in any aspect of the world, and anything that you think about, there are people who are naturally,
right, exactly. Everybody comes with it. Yeah.
It's just like that. There are people like that, but that shouldn't set the example.
Definitely. I remember having a conversation with somebody about this, and it was along the lines of, I feel as though a lot of times as musicians, as saxophone players, we approach music as an art only and forget that it's also a science. And not literally, but in terms of the systematic approach to developing what you need to then be able to express yourself in the ways that you need to. And the way how you put it, because we started talking about, the idea of humanity in music. But then there's also this other half of making sure you can play the instrument, and the attitude and approach in those two spheres seems to be slightly different. And it's reminding me of a quote, I think, which is from Miles Davis, which is like, practice sober and play drunk, or something like that. The idea of like being really systematic and making sure you understand your instrument and just have all of that handled. And then when you get to the bandstand, you can focus on creating something with your bandmates and being expressive and bringing in the human element to what you're doing. Yeah.
But I mean, we're having this conversation this is a conversation in between two people who are professionals, because you're a great saxophone player and a composer in your own right. I wouldn't be having this conversation with someone who just started first year at university or Humber College. They don't need to hear this yet.
Okay.
They need to hear that, your fingers need to be in the right position. And I mean, I have been proven that my way is not the only way. And again, I'll say it again. not trying to create a church.
Right.
On my way works for me, and it works for a lot of other people.
It works for me. It works for me.
If you're unsure about what to follow, I mean, it's kind of interesting because with other instruments, for bass players, like acoustic bass players, this is very clear. For piano players, this is very clear. Like piano players have no problem understanding that they need to play like classical, whatever, Western European music, if you want to call it that. You don't want to use the term classic, But with saxophone, I think it might have to do with the fact that the tone changes drastically.
Right.
And, embouchure and stuff like that is so different than that the jazz guys tend to not pay that much attention with that. And there seems to be a consensus where there's a way to practice technique with all these approaches to jazz school and doing all these diatonic things and doing that. I mean, sure, there's a lot of people that play a whole lot of saxophone, and that's fine. For me, it's worked out better that I play the saxophone like a saxophone and I work on it like an instrument.
Right.
And then once I'm doing what I need to do, then I move on to try to create music with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me to try to mix the two.
Yeah.
I need to get the saxophone sounding and doing the things that I needed to do.
Yeah.
And then I can think about making music. In my approach, I'm not alone in it. There's a very famous now interview of Charlie Parker with Paul Desmond on YouTube. It's available to anybody. Where he clearly tells, like Paul's treating him like a god, and just clearly tells Paul, well, I practiced what was it, 13 to 16 hours every day for a period of 5 years.
Wow.
And that was just a saxophone. And maybe if you don't come from playing classical saxophone, you might not understand this, but that was the first thing I got when I started listening to Bert. It's like, here's someone who can play the saxophone.
Yeah. Like
this guy has a complete understanding of the instrument. No questions asked.
Right.
So I mean, if you're unsure about what path to follow, that's a pretty good one. It works for a lot of people. I mean,
It's really been a pleasure talking with you about your own journey and about those ideas of, music being music and playing the saxophone being separate spheres, but how they overlap. And I really love the idea of just making sure that you're addressing the human condition through your music. Before we wrap up today, I have a rapid fire question game that I would like us to play called 3, 2, 1. So I'd like you to share 3 albums that have been influential, 2 saxophone players that have been influential for you, and leave our audience with 1 piece of advice.
3 records that were influential to me.
Yeah.
I mean, 3, it's too little numbers, but off the top of my head that I could think of, Charlie Parker with strings.
Yeah.
John Culture and A Loud Supreme. And Miles Davis, Miles Smile.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, those are 3. I'm trying to think things that are very different from one another.
Right. Yeah.
So
cool. And who were 2 saxophone players that were really influential for you?
I mean, again, the list will need to be a lot longer, but I would say the most important ones would be Charlie Parker and John Coltrane.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And what's 1 piece of advice you want to leave with the audience?
To always follow your natural instinct.
Wow.
You're gonna have people, in whatever it is that you do, especially if you happen to be a creative person, you're gonna have all kinds of people trying to diminish what you do, trying to talk you out of it. don't listen to them. Just continue on your journey, and you'll find yourself. Just believe in yourself. Keep going. If it speaks to you, if you feel it in your gut, just go for it.
Man, whew, I'm accepting that piece of advice right now. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to sit down with you and
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
And chat again. If you're listening and you want to connect with Luis, you can go check his website. What's your website again, Luis?
It's luisdenizmusic.com.
Amazing. He's also on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
What's your handle on Instagram?
Luis Deniz Music.
Amazing. So across all platforms, Luis Deniz Music. Thank you again, Luis. If you're listening, thanks so much for checking out this episode of the podcast. And I hope that this conversation was both inspirational and empowers you to keep taking ground in your personal and professional and also creative journeys as a saxophone player. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you, Luis.